I want to thank Sri Kumar Podar for giving me the honor of introducing our first speaker, Raj Mohan Gandhi. For some of you may have been at the lectures on Thursday night that he and Dr. Guha delivered. It was a really wonderful evening, and if you weren't there, you can find the entire thing has been recorded, and it's just see me or Dean Barnett. We can tell you where you can find it on our college's website. It was a wonderful evening, but I have to confess that their observations about contemporary India, and to a lesser extent about the U.S., were quite sobering, and certainly echoed the concerns that are expressed by many people here in the U.S. about the divisive communalist politics that seem to have engulfed the U.S. in recent months and years. This is going to sound very strange. The evening actually reminded me about a colonialist novel, A Passage to India by E.M. Forster. The ending of the book, for those of you who know the novel, the main Indian character who's been persecuted by the British, and one of its other British characters at the end of the novel finds that it's impossible for them to be friends. And in Forster's words, he said the horses didn't want it, they swerved apart. The earth didn't want it. The temples, the tank, the jail, the palace, the birds, the carrion, the guest house, they didn't want it. They said in their 100 voices, no, not yet. And the sky said, no, not there. Now, I'm not going to get into the egregious legacy of British colonialism or American and other imperialisms that might make amity and cooperation challenging in our world, although I will say that what was remarkable for me studying the Indian nationalist movement was the way in which they were able to actually develop such friendship with their recent colonizers. What strikes me even more, however, is that within our own countries, among fellow citizens, and in the U.S. case, would-be citizens, we seem to be engulfed by a politics of division. Now, when I was a student, the words of Gandhi, Ji, Nehru, and their colleagues really touched me very deeply. And in my long years, growing long in tooth now, as an adult, right, Raj Mohan Gandhi's writings have also struck a chord as very powerful, right, on their own right. I'm sure you're all familiar with Professor Gandhi's remarkable record as a journalist, a public intellectual, an activist, a politician, and from his trailblazing editorship at Himat, right, his current commentary and contemporary affairs, and his many, many books, his work at Asia Plateau on reconciliation. So you are, I don't think I need to rehearse all these. So what I'm going to do, if you'll indulge me for a minute or two, is a personal reflection on Gandhi's role for me as a teacher, both in his writings and in his actions, both in and out of the classroom. I think that his work on India's nationalist movement and its leaders has never been more relevant for Americans, right? For Indians, of course, and for others across the globe. As he put it in a recent article, India's freedom movement sprang from a longing, a dream to restore the dignity of the vulnerable individual. The movement's leaders expressed a deep commitment to social justice, for the most disadvantaged and oppressed, to ending poverty and discrimination, to promoting equality before the law, and to encouraging service to the nation and humankind more broadly. Their words and nonviolent actions inspired not only Indians, but people around the world. We're all familiar, of course, with the legacy of their direct descendants in Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and many others. Excuse me. Unfortunately now, both in the U.S. and in India, there are those who reject the kind of inclusive and nonviolent vision that was offered by Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, and others, and instead promote divisiveness, condone violence against minorities, and tolerate economic injustice. Last November, after the elections, I was a bit despondent. Some of you may not have been, but I was. And Professor Gandhi was on campus at the time, and he reminded me in his quiet way, as his grandfather had pointed out, truth and love triumph in the long run. Tyranny and justice always lose. And he also reminded me that people have to find ways to fight tyranny and to resist injustice. His writings and his teaching here at MSU, I know, have helped our students get through a rather challenging time. And I think that's because of Raj Mohan's approach to history. He's a careful, evidence-driven scholar. Anyone who's read The Good Boatman or Why Gandhi Still Matters cannot fail to be impressed by his dispassionate analysis. Being a careful historian, of course, is a wonderful accomplishment in its own right, but I think that Professor Gandhi is much more than just a historian. He manages to keep history and its lessons alive, to make history fresh and relevant to our times. He models in his books and articles and in his classroom teaching the very principles that made the Indian national liberation movement so remarkable. His writing and lectures excite students to understand why studying Gandhiji, Nehru, Ghaffar Khan Patel, all the others he's written about, right? Why these leaders should still speak to us. He's passionate about his subject matter. He's passionate about his belief in nonviolence and the power of friendship. On the other hand, he's always very composed, respectful and civil, even to those with whom he disagrees. And in a day and age when political discourse has been degraded to bombastic assertions, shouting matches, inane tweets, when the sky and the earth, as Forster might say, seem to shout out against inclusion and acceptance and rejoicing in diversity, Raj Mohan Gandhi ought to be regarded as required reading for political leaders, but it's probably too much to ask, especially those who don't read, and followers and students like all of us. He asked us to take seriously the questions that are raised by Forster. Right? If not here, where? If not now, when will we act? We're very lucky to have him here in East Lansing again this year, to learn from him, and I hope to have him return to us many more times. Most of you will know the Theosophist adage that when the student's ready, the teacher will appear. And we're ready. So I hope please welcome Dr. Raj Mohan.
Thank you so much, Shri Kumarji, very much for giving me the chance to meet your friends. I look forward very much to hearing you and Dr. Raju and my old friend whom I'm meeting after a long time, Ravi Chopra. Now, there are many kinds of Gandhi. I'm supposed to speak on Gandhi. There is the conflict resolution Gandhi. There's a wonderful Australian lady called Margaret Hepworth, who has written a book called The Gandhi Experiment for School Children, for conflict resolution in schools. Just came out. There is the management guru Gandhi also, believe it or not. Several people have written about Gandhi as a kind of management aid. And there is, of course, the nonviolent change Gandhi, the Gandhi who inspired Martin Luther King Jr. There is the Swachh Bharat Gandhi, the Gandhi who is the icon of the Clean India movement. So the Gandhi with the broom, a very real Gandhi. Gandhi was very often with the broom, and he was cleaning his own home and his center and encouraging everybody. So this is at the moment the Gandhi that is being presented most regularly to the people of India, the Let's Clean India Gandhi. There is the Gandhi with the stick, the marching Gandhi, the Quit India Gandhi, the Salt March Gandhi. There is also the Noakhali Gandhi, the Bihar Gandhi, the reconciler, the person who tries to heal divisions. So, is Gandhi relevant today? According to some people, a relevant Gandhi would be a Gandhi who would have solved all of our problems in the world today. And since there are so many problems, obviously Gandhi is not relevant. There is so much corruption in India. How is Gandhi relevant? There is violence in India. Where is Gandhi's relevance? There's also the notion that a relevant person is somebody who is popular. 2 days ago in one of the classes here at MSU, a student pointed out who had an close Indian friend, and this close Indian friend had told this American student, well, Gandhi is not that popular today in India. So has Gandhi lost his relevance because he seems to be less popular than he was? Seems to me that the very fact that we are having this discussion, is Gandhi relevant today, tells us something. How many meetings are being held across America today with the theme, is Roosevelt relevant? So they were the same generation. How many meetings are being held in Great Britain today to ask, is Winston Churchill relevant? Are there many meetings? Is John Kennedy relevant? The very fact that we gather to ask ourselves, is Gandhi relevant or not, shows us at least he's topical, he's being talked about, which is in itself is of some interest. To my mind, Gandhi's relevance to us today can be looked at from two angles. And the first angle was disclosed when a wonderful African-American figure called William Stewart Nelson, who was dean at Howard University in Washington, D.C. He went in 1946 December all the way to India to meet with Gandhi. And this was December 46, and already terrible violence had taken place in India, although the really great carnage was to occur the following year in 1947. William Stewart Nelson asked Gandhi, you have been teaching India non-violence for 30 years. Why this violence? And the answer that Gandhi gave was something to this effect. I try to teach India to fear not and to hate not. The first message they learned, the second message they did not learn. Fear not and hate not. You know, Nehru, in his appraisal of Gandhi, said that the amazing thing, that almost like a magician, like a psychologist, he diagnosed the fear, he identified the fear, and the fear was expelled. But hate not. Well, that was something that Gandhi tried to preach, but you know something we should learn, or remember rather? Gandhi's was not the only voice being heard in India. There were many other voices. There were Muslim voices advocating hatred. There were Hindu voices advocating hatred. Gandhi's was a powerful voice, but there were other competing voices. And indeed, Gandhi was more successful in enlisting people for fear not, less successful for enlisting Indians for hate not. The second point. We know of Gandhi. I gave this image of Gandhi with the stick. Gandhi demanding quit India, leading the fight for Indian independence, which was successful. Yes, partition also came, violence also came, but independence did come in August 47. It was an amazing thing. But also, Gandhi was fighting for individual freedom. He didn't just want India to be free, he wanted Indians to be free, to think that they wanted to think, to express themselves. It was wonderful to hear that prayer, both in words and then through the instrument. It was wonderful, that prayer with so many names of the Almighty. You know, when William Stewart Nelson was in Noakhali in East Bengal, which was a Muslim majority area, where Gandhi was trying to bring reconciliation and amity after terrible violence, there was a very large meeting one evening of many Muslim villagers, and Gandhi was conducting a prayer meeting, and he asked this African American Christian, William Stewart Nelson, to sing a Christian song. So, one way of understanding Gandhi is to picture a large audience of Muslim men, women, and children, a Hindu Gandhi presiding at this meeting, and asking the African American Christian to sing a Christian song to this group. Now, this vision of Gandhi, of people who are individually free to believe that they wanted to believe, and to speak and write what they wanted to write, this vision, of course, is now under threat. We must recognize that, which is what makes Gandhi also more relevant than ever. You've been hearing of these incidents, not just in India, but also in Pakistan, also in Bangladesh, also in Burma, of assaults on individual freedom. And so we probably should go back to Gandhi and see what he has to say. The person who wrote this amazing prayer that was heard today, Vinoba Bhave, about whom we will hear from Dr. Raju, an absolutely extraordinary human being. Vinoba was with Gandhi from 1917, but it was only in 1940, 23 years after, that all of India heard about Vinoba. Because Gandhi asked Vinoba to be the very first person in a remarkable campaign called Individual Civil Disobedience, in the course of which several thousand Indians, with complete discipline and complete peace, invited imprisonment by very courteously defying a particular law. This was called Individual Civil Disobedience Movement. When Vinoba was arrested, as he defied the law, and Gandhi wanted to publish the news of Vinoba's arrest in his journal, Harijan, the British said that no, the news of Vinoba Bhave's arrest could not be published. He was told, no news of arrest can be published. So what did Gandhi do at that point? He suspended the publication of the newspaper. And he made a statement saying that from now on, every Indian shall become a walking newspaper. Every Indian shall become a walking newspaper. And he gave very clear guidelines of what the journalist in the walking newspaper should be like, how she or he should write and report. It had to be truthful news, obtained with evidence, conveyed with restraint, but conveyed absolutely fearlessly. And he said, if you pass this around person by person, all of India will know of it, and you will not need printed newspapers. He was talking about social media in 1940. I think I should now stop because we must let others a chance to speak. So I've given my 2 points, the 2 kinds of Gandhi. One who wants fear not and hate not, and the one who also wants individual independence apart from national independence. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Eric Eder, and I'm a long-term student of Dr. Raju. I've been asked to introduce him. Dr. Raju was born in a small village near Bangalore, India, now the Silicon Valley of India. He earned a master's in economics in Keynesian economics, the economics which brought America and other countries out of the Great Depression. Keynes taught that capital tends to accumulate towards the wealthy in capitalist societies, eventually leading to a crisis in economic demand because most people can no longer afford to buy things. Keynes' main solution was to distribute the money back to the poor, often through work programs, to recreate economic demand. Dr. Raju then came to MSU for PhD studies on how to improve Indian agriculture through change strategies known as diffusion. Dr. Raju studied with the founder of diffusion theory, Everett Rogers, here at Michigan State. Dr. Raju has since led a number of development projects in India and elsewhere through the International Service Society. Dr. Raju is a teacher of Vedanta, the Hindu philosophy of oneness, which he freely teaches to anyone. Dr. Raju's Indian Vedanta guru, Shankara Linga Bhagavan, was also a Gandhian. Let me tell you 4 short parts about him. During the independence struggle, the British began rounding up the Indian freedom advocates to imprison them. Instead of fleeing the British, his guru accepted his fate and was arrested. While in prison, his guru taught Vedanta and sung holy songs. The guards trusted him so much they let him walk freely. The British offered him early freedom, but he refused to leave the prison until India was completely independent. When India won its independence, the government offered his guru a pension because he was an Indian freedom fighter advocate. Shankara Linga Bhagavan declined the pension and asked that the money be used to help all Indians, especially the poor. So, since the 1960s, Dr. Raju, like his guru, has worked to promote Vedanta and Gandhian development and values globally with humility, integrity, and intelligence. So I now introduce to you Dr. Raju.
Friends, I would like to thank Eric for the kind introduction he made, and he accepted to do that with a very short notice. I'm grateful to him. Also, I thank Vaishnava Center, Sri Kumar Poddar, and Mayurika for giving me this opportunity to speak on Vinoba Bhave. As Professor Gandhi just mentioned, how Vinoba Bhave was recognized as the first individual satyagrahi in India. Preparation for that type of a quality of life, he had gone through several phases. There is a book which is also there, Moved by Love. In that, Kalindi, who wrote it in Hindi, collecting the talks of Vinoba Bhave and translated by Marjorie Sykes and others, will give us an insight into Vinoba Bhave's own evolution and his way of approaching the environments and people to understand the functioning of this world and what anybody can do. As he says there, his search was for peace of Himalayas. He was a very contemplative person. That was how his parentage, his mother Rukmini and father Narhar Bhave, had given him a first-hand experience of what the notion of God is. He was a very, very devoted and also a very authentic believer in God. That was very fundamental in his family upbringing. But he was not satisfied with that. Therefore, he wanted to further understand the nature of God and what a human being can do. So he went to Benares, which is known as the Center for Learning, and he wanted to meet scholarly people and discuss and learn the scriptures of Vedic tradition and Hindu tradition. And when he was there in 1916, Mahatma Gandhi, who was 46 years old, I think at that point. Vinoba Bhave was 21 years old. He read some of the speeches of Mahatma Gandhi, and he felt, I was seeking the peace of Himalayas. Also, he was very much influenced by the revolutionary movement that was going on in Bengal at that time. He was also attracted towards that revolutionary movement. He wanted to go there. So he was in the crossroads of his own search for what path he has to take. And when he heard Mahatma Gandhi's speech, which he gave at Benares Hindu University, he was so attracted by the way Mahatma Gandhi talked about many things. He wrote to him, seeking explanations, especially non-violence and all that. Mahatma Gandhi simply said, you come here, he was in Kochrab Ashram near Ahmedabad. You come here, we can discuss, we can live together and understand. And very sincerely and fervently, Vinoba went to him. And he says, I found in Mahatma Gandhi the peace of Himalayas and also the revolutionary spirit of Bengal. This is how his search made him to go to Mahatma Gandhi. And for the next several years, 3 decades or so, he spent with Mahatma Gandhi. And as he says himself, I was a rock and I received from Mahatma Gandhi a shape. He sculpted me. So this is how he owes to Mahatma Gandhi his style of life and his mission and his message and what a human being can do. It is about 3 decades plus now, 35 years that he passed away in 1982. And his birthday was very recently, September 11th. It is about 122 years. So his life of 82 years, he spent half of his lifetime in his family, with his parents, and certain educational atmosphere in one of the great universities, Baroda city, Baroda also. And then the rest of his time was with Mahatma Gandhi. So, when Mahatma Gandhi introduced him as the first Satyagrahi, he had already seen in Vinoba a personality and a force that can present itself to the great powers, political, military, or whatever other powers. That was how Vinoba emerged. And after that, for quite some time, till Mahatma Gandhi passed away, he continued his work in his own personal, quiet way in different ashrams. And then in 1951, he was very much disturbed because, as Professor Gandhi mentioned, the violence was all over because of various reasons. The partition and also feudalism was there, especially in Hyderabad state then, Nizam's dominion. All the lands were for Jagirdars or Inamdars, big zamindars. So there were a lot of landless people, especially in Hyderabad, a part of that Telangana. He read all that, this violence, communist movements, communist leaders were attacking the landlords and they wanted to take away the land forcibly, violently. And all this he was reading and observing. he began to reflect about the principle of non-violence, which he had learned and practiced in his ashram surroundings, how that practice could be taken further in an extended way to address these basic problems of the haves and have-nots. And he walked to Telangana, that is a region, and in a small village called Pochampalli. He went there, and there were lots of landless people, the Harijans, very poor. And then he wanted to know what is going on. How can he help them? They simply said, give us a few acres of land. Numerically, he said 80 acres of land. We all families will be able to cultivate. And then he said, okay, I will take your request to the government and then make sure that you get that land. That was how he started. As he was talking and conversing in the village, one great person, a great landlord named Mr. Ramachandra Reddy, he was a great landlord. He simply got up. He said, I will give 100 acres of land. It moved him. It is not the government he has to go and get, but a human being is able to understand the nature of the needs and is able to share. That opened up in him how there is a way by which many of these conflicts and other type of violent activities, where he considered even government is a coercive agent. The laws that are made with whatever procedure, still behind it is the coercive power of the government. So he began to think about how there can be a way by which we can approach people and see each other in a new light, so that it is not necessary to depend on these violence or even the coercive governmental system. So he began to talk about the third power, he used to say. That is the love, the voluntary understanding of human beings as to who they are, how they can share each other, their property, their wealth, their intelligence, their skills. This is how the notion of Dan means gift in English, but actually he began to redefine the meaning for Dan using one of the great teachers, Shankaracharya. He defines what is dana. In Sanskrit, he says, danam samvibhagaha. Dana means simply in a very fair way dividing whatever we have with us. That is dana, it is not gift. So this way, Vinoba Bhave was able to rediscover in his own thoughts the ideas that can be shared with the people, so that people will be able to see in themselves a potentiality. And he did not believe in the class conflict notion. And he said, there is no haves and have-nots. Everyone has. That's how he said. Whether it is labor, whether it is talents or property, everyone has something. Therefore, we can exchange, we can share. So this is how his approach was, based on this type of an affirmative understanding of the nature of human beings and their capacities. So his vision was to strengthen this capability of every person becoming a source for a wealth. Nobody is deprived of anything. This way he wanted to build a society. He writes, I would like to bring about triple revolution, he says. One is change of heart, another one is change of our habits of life, how we conduct, how we behave. The third one is changing the very structure and the functioning of the society. This is how he felt the revolution can be brought about in the most non-violent way. And when he felt in 2 or 3 occasions the response that came from the people, he felt what he is saying is not something, his words. It is all, he was a believer in God, it is all God's words, God's grace. So he discovered in each one the presence of the deep spirit of holiness. He said, every being is essentially a potentially spiritual being. Only we have to spend a lot of time to see those very great qualities and invoke in them and work and wait till they will be able to express those best qualities. So this was how he worked with his workers, great volunteers, and traveled across India for about 19 to 20 years. Many times, most of the time he walked. Afterwards, in the later years, he used car travel and all that. But he spent about 20 years traveling across India, making his appeal for people to prepare themselves to build what he called Sarvodaya. That means progress for all. And he says, all that I am doing and saying, I have derived inspiration from Mahatma Gandhi. In that sense, he became an extension agent of what Mahatma Gandhi was teaching in the ashrams and what he was doing in his public life. He began to apply in the domain of social and economic, taking land as an important issue. And he said, Bhudan it is called, land gift. He says, it is not that I am only focusing on land. My approach is using this as a means by which people think differently in a revolutionary way. So this was how he got inspiration from people, and he inspired in turn the people. This mutual type of interaction went on for 19 to 20 years. And at the end of it, he had already influenced many people. And one of the great persons of whom Mr. Sri Kumar Poddar will be talking a little later after me, Sri Jayaprakash Narayan. He was one of the most people's man. And he was able to see in the message and the work of Mahatma Gandhi a third way by which we can free ourselves from the communism, the capitalism, and other types of ideas, socialist ideas. Trusteeship was one of the important concepts of Mahatma Gandhi, and Vinoba Bhave emphasized the trusteeship concept. So, the land gift movement is a trusteeship movement. He experimented in different ways in his own personal life to prepare himself for these things. He lived what he called without money, Kanchana Mukti he called. And he had what is called farming without using any animal or any other type of mechanical power, using his own bodily labor to plow, to dig. So he called Rishi Keti. And then he also talked about what he called Sarvodaya Patra, meaning every child in the home should have an opportunity to understand that a child can contribute the habit of sharing. So many of these kinds of things innovatively he presented to people, and people understood him. He always talked to the people using the idioms and also the vocabulary of the religious area. He studied great scriptures of major religions, and then he brought about a sense of harmony. Therefore, his approach for total revolution or social revolution is moved by compassion, as he says. Sometimes he says, I was inspired by Buddha. Buddha had an idea of what was called then Dharma Chakra Parivartana. That means I am moving the wheels of Dharma or law. Similarly, Vinoba says, I am now bearing that burden and that yoke, and I am presenting this new idea so that societies, not necessarily a nation or any other type, he came up with the slogan of Jai Jagat. Jagat means world. Many times, nationalist feelings are there. Each country has its own name. So always they say victory to India, victory to a particular country. No, he said, no, we have to go beyond this nationalist feelings. We should accept the whole world and work for the harmony of human being. So he was essentially a humanist, but yet he was inspired by that great faith in God. The notion of God is not someone sitting somewhere ordering, but in each being, in each human being, in the heart of every being, there is the presence of that spirit. We have to recognize and relate to that. So this was how he not only wrote on all these things in his own commentaries as well as independent texts, but he lived like that. Therefore, whenever he spoke, people felt that authenticity. There is no questions asked, simply to listen and to see, but this is how we have to do. So that type of a conviction he carried. His speeches are of that type. And he lived for 82 years. And in the final days, he adopted deep silence. He said, I have done my work, but this work will go on. People will carry on this work. I do not want to be there to direct or to give guidance. So he was a great optimist. And his ideas of that hope and that faith is still there. So Mahatma Gandhi and Vinoba Bhave have shown us we can do certain things, however much difficult it may be. But that is the call and also the way in which human beings can develop their vision and conduct their life and contribute for the welfare and greatness of all. So this is my way to tell how he was moved. He was moved not only by his own understanding, but when people responded, that became a source for him to go further. So there was a snowball effect, and he created and details what is happening now. He established 6 ashrams in order to present this message to the whole of India. He went to East Pakistan then also. So I will stop here, and then I would like to introduce Mr. Sri Kumar Poddar, who will further take how this message in the work of Sri Jayaprakash Narayan contributed for the further development of the people's power and also maintaining the democratic values in India and other places. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Raju, for an excellent presentation on Acharya Vinoba Bhave. I'm going to describe the work of Jayaprakash Narayan, his concept and his experiment of implementing the movement for total revolution in India. But before I talk about that, I must introduce myself. I was very fortunate to have met Sri Jayaprakash Narayan at the age of 9. He was a friend of my mama, maternal uncle, and used to come to my Nana's house for dinner with his wife Prabhavati. While that meeting left a lasting impression on me, but I didn't understand much of his philosophy and his work until India became very close to having a dictatorship by Nehru's daughter, Indira Gandhi. And just a year prior to that, we had a terrible famine in parts of India, and my friends in the United States urged me to go establish contact with JP. By that time, JP had taken the leadership of the students in Bihar who were fighting the corruption of Chief Minister Gafoor. JP made one condition: I'll be happy to lead you, provided you give me your absolute commitment to nonviolence. And it's a lesson people of the world can derive that a very short period of time, less than 2 years, despite invocation of a fascist order on India by Mrs. Gandhi, declared as emergency rule in 1975, June 26th, actually 25th night, all top leaders were arrested. Now, Jayaprakash Narayan was put in jail, and he confirms that his kidneys were damaged in the prison on the express order of Mrs. Gandhi. And as his situation deteriorated, Mrs. Gandhi brought him to All India Medical Institute in Delhi, and when the doctors confirmed that he's not going to live very long, she decided to make his funeral arrangements in Patna and release him from jail. He was treated in Jaslok Hospital by famous nephrologist Dr. Mani, who put him on dialysis 3 times a week, every other day, and it's very tiring and fatiguing. And JP underwent this, and Mrs. Gandhi foolishly announced elections, thinking that for 2 years nearly, she was on the front page of every newspaper. There was no adverse comments in the major media about her dictatorial rule. So she thought that she will win. Her intelligence people knew that she was not very popular, that she was going to lose. But they did not dare to send a message that was not going to be to her liking. So once she declared the elections, she did not get a single seat in anywhere in northern India. And she and her son, Sanjay Gandhi, both lost their seats in parliament. She had already been declared unfit to run for any elected office by Allahabad court because of election corruption practices that she had indulged in. As a result, some of us here, Dr. Chopra, Dr. Raju, my wife, we started Indians for Democracy. And nobody thought that we will succeed in less than 50 years. But there were a few of us who felt this emergency rule cannot last more than 2 years. And we had heated discussion and debate about this. There was only one publication that was not censored by Mrs. Gandhi. And we have editor of Himmat, Dr. Mohan Gandhi. I don't know why she favored him, except to think that it was being supported by a moral rearmament movement from West Germany. Is that correct?
Sorry, there are two mistakes. One, she also tried to censor Himmat very much. And that's another story. I'm sorry, I shouldn't
Okay.
publicly correct you, but
Anyway, because of Himmat's braveness to give news that was sometimes not favorable to Mrs. Gandhi, I and Dr. Chopra came in contact with Dr. Gandhi, and it has been a joy to have been part of that early freedom struggle from the authoritarian regime of Mrs. Gandhi. But let me tell you something. Despite the censorship in India, the news did travel. You heard the story of how social media, word of mouth. We thought because of censorship, we were not knowing what's going on. But I can tell you that what Mrs. Gandhi was talking in her office, in her privacy, the information came here. We had more information with censorship than we have without censorship. And JP's approach of people's participation was so successful that in a state of Bihar, which was known for its corruption, out of 40,000 villages, 10,000 had People's Committee. And whatever JP told the People's Committee, it reached the entire Bihar. So if he called for Bihar Bandh, 90% of the people followed him. And in less than 2 years, the election of 1977 defeated Mrs. Gandhi, and her authoritarian rule came to an early end. Now, after India announced election, all the neighboring dictatorship countries, Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, they also announced election, not realizing that this was going to go against the rulers. I had a number of opportunities to meet Jayaprakash Narayan. I traveled with him in Bihar, and after the election result, he became the uncrowned king of India. the entire Janata Party unanimously asked him to pick the next prime minister. He was in frail health. His doctors decided that to do dialysis, they couldn't find a vein. So they had to poke him several times. So they decided to take him to Seattle and install a artificial tube in his right arm, which will be a permanent entry point for exchanging blood by dialysis. So JP's friends asked me that since I had lived so many years in this country, I should travel with him to Seattle. So I sent Mayurika to book reservations of 6 people in Air India to travel with JP. Morarji Desai was picked by JP, and he offered to pay all expenses of his medical expenses. But JP said, I'm representing the common people of India, and I will not take a single rupee from the national exchequer. I will collect 1 rupee each from people of India. But immediately, we had to come up the money to buy tickets. So, Air India wanted to charge us full fare, when excursion fare was less than half, and the person who went to buy the tickets was told by Air India, I'm sorry, we can't give you excursion fare. So that's why I asked Mayurika to go to Air India office, and I don't know why they agreed to her to give the reduced fare. Morarji Desai told Air India that when JP is traveling in first class, there will be no other passengers. So he will have his doctor, his nurse, his secretary, and Mr. Poddar to travel with him, 1 person at a time, paying economy fare. I was allowed to sit in first class. I spent a few days at Seattle, and I asked JP, what's your wish I should do? And he said, you handle my PR, because there'll be people calling about my health, and my staff is not capable of handling these phone calls. So I told the hospital to give me an office and a telephone, and I fielded phone calls from the top leaders of not only Janata Party, but big supporters of Mrs. Gandhi. Now they want to show that they are for JP, when throughout emergency they were against him, including the K.K. Birla. He called, and he was big supporter of Mrs. Gandhi, and he had given a big purse to Jagjeevan Ram of 10 crore rupees. But because of Indians for Democracy's intervention, Morarji Desai got the prime ministership and not Jagjeevan Ram. So he was very sad that he lost 10 crore rupees, didn't get any benefit out of it. But what JP's Total Revolution movement said was this: if we want a better society, it can't be done by government fiat. It has to be each individual. And self-transformation, self-reliance. Now, people habitually think that you have to have a powerful leader to lead a country and to raise the standard of living and solve problems. No matter how powerful the leader is, it is only as good as the moral authority he can wield. And most politicians in the world today don't have much moral authority. So when JP's message reached common people and they understood his message, I just explained you how those 10,000 villages in Bihar became free of corruption. The strategy was very simple. If a government official takes bribe, the whole village will boycott him. Nobody will have any association, any dialogue, any relationship. And the government officials knew that they can't survive without cooperation from the people. So they straightened out. I tell you one case, again from the state of Bihar, that one policeman took 3,000 rupee bribe from a poor farmer. You are going or you are telling me to stop? Okay, anyway, so this matter came before the People's Committee. Even though they had no legal power, they issued a notice to the daroga of that police station where this policeman worked and called him for a hearing. He showed up in his jeep. The People's Committee told him, you leave the jeep here as security, walk back to your office, bring that policeman and have him apologize and return 3,000 rupees. That policeman was brought and 3,000 rupees was returned, and this message went throughout the state. So there are ways of bringing about desirable results, and what could not be accomplished in years and years, a mass mobilization of people's power accomplished it in less than 2 years, and it was that kind of message that spread throughout India which brought about a fundamental change in thinking. The slogan of the Movement for Total Revolution was, we do not want, let's see, what did they say? Janta ki sarkar, means we don't want people's government. People are the government. Janta hi sarkar hai. And that's a very important and powerful message. Today, all economic progress of any country, India, United States, Europe, is not done by one man sitting in the top office. It's millions and millions of people doing their own work that makes the difference. And this is how the Movement for Total Revolution's ideas spread throughout India, and they can be adopted by people of the whole world. I am going to stop here and introduce briefly Dr. Ravi Chopra. He and I met only in 1973 or 74, or maybe 72, I don't remember the exact year. And shortly thereafter, we started a newsletter fortnightly called Indian Opinion, named after Gandhi's newsletter in South Africa. And Ravi was the editor, I was the publisher. And all the censored news we published and mailed thousands of copies to India. So, Mrs. Gandhi selected 2 people to be assassinated after the election if she won. Unfortunately, Ravi's name was not one of the 2. Dr. Rajni Kothari and I were the 2 people who were chosen for that honor. But if she had won the election, I won't be here. So he and I go back a long time, and he was going out with an American girl in Hoboken, New Jersey. So I told him that if you want to work in the villages of India, break up with her, because she's not going to follow you to India and live in a village. He said, I'll make a condition to her. You want to marry me? You have to be willing to live in Indian village. And she did agree to that condition. And they got married. An American girl marrying a penniless Indian revolutionary. They hardly earned a few thousand rupees, and I don't know how they managed to raise 2 kids. But then Ravi Chopra, 3. Yeah, Ravi Chopra founded People's Science Institute, and they do remarkable work. And Vaishnava Center is grateful to People's Science Institute for supporting our humanitarian work of helping the survivors of tragedies. We've done many remarkable things with his cooperation, and now with the floods in Bihar and Assam, he has agreed to help us spend some money that will come from our friends in the United States and India as well. And he will monitor and he will spend that money very wisely. He has a very good track record and is very happy that his daughter Kathleen, who just got married 8 days back to Daniel. He is a British passport holder and is a student in Chicago, and they are here to listen not to Dr. Ravi Chopra but to other speakers. And it is very great pleasure that in 2007, when we gave Dr. Ravi Chopra Lifetime Achievement Award, Kathleen came unannounced to Ravi, and so did Ravi's sister and brother-in-law. So I had to keep them separated in different rooms, and he was wondering why I'm doing all this, but he didn't know who were the other people in the room. So finally, when lunchtime came, the problem was how are we going to keep Ravi's seeing his family members. I can't understand your signaling. So, his sister had her camera when I opened the door to the room, and Ravi saw his family members there and he was shocked. So, why did you all people come? We came to hear you. So, that's another story, and now we want to turn it over to Dr. Chopra for his presentation on the current situation and how this will lead to a new India of our dreams. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back here. It's a room that I'm getting accustomed to. But still, I feel a bit odd. I'm the youngest of the 4 speakers. And so I hope that my elders will excuse any mistakes that I make, but please point them out. Please point them out during the discussion. And for those who are younger and find holes in my argument, just smile indulgently. Okay. So Sri Kumar has changed the topic. He gave me enough time though. And he wanted me to talk about the new hope emerging in India. Let me start at the beginning then. the birth of any nation, of most nations, is often quite traumatic. But I'm guessing that few nations were born or became independent in grimmer circumstances than India did in 1947. Some of you may recall that we got independence in the receding shadows of the food disaster, 1943 food disaster of Bengal. That our independence was accompanied by the murderous violence during partition. And India was engulfed in hunger, poverty, and misery. Perhaps the largest human migration of the time took place then. 10 to 12 million people are said to have migrated, and the death toll of the violence the estimates range from several 100,000 to a few million. Neighbors turned mercilessly upon their own neighbors. But despite all this grimness, the leaders of this poor, hungry, broken, miserable nation were bold enough to renew the promises of the freedom struggle. They promised a nation committed to justice, social justice, political justice, economic justice. What were these promises? In terms of political justice, they promised equality before the law, and they promised every Indian, adult Indian, equal right to vote. Social justice meant an end to caste discrimination, equal respect for all religions, and the upliftment of women. Economic justice was promised in the form of land to the tiller and the promotion of Indian capital as opposed to foreign capital. I should remind you that at that time, there was hardly any Indian capital to speak of. Most industry and big business was owned by the British. Now today, these promises don't appear very exciting. They appear quite mundane. They are taken for granted. But it wasn't so in 1947. In 1947, they were very bold promises. You can recall equality before the law. When did America get equality before the law for everybody? How many decades ago? About 5 decades ago? After the civil rights movement? Almost 2 centuries after independence? Equal right to vote. We know about the blacks in this country, but even women didn't get the equal right to vote right at the time of independence in most nations. So these were really remarkable promises. Many of these promises were greeted with tremendous skepticism around the world. Winston Churchill said in the House of Commons, and I'll quote him, "In handing over the government of India to these so-called political classes, we are handing over to men of straw, he didn't recognize the women, of whom in a few years no trace will remain. In fact, few knowledgeable people across the world thought that independent India would survive as one nation for very long. I'm sure Rajmohan remembers the newspapers of the 1950s. We had this peculiar word that would show up on the front pages every now and then. It was called fissiparous tendencies. India has fissiparous tendencies, meaning it's a place that is going to split apart, a fissile explosion, because it's too diverse. There are too many different types of people over here. How can they all stay together? Some people said, equal right to vote? In an illiterate country? How are people going to read the candidates' names? The answer was very simply solved. We gave them symbols. All the candidates got symbols. People can recognize symbols and they can vote for the candidate of their choice. So in 1950, 3 years after independence, these promises were codified, embodied in the Indian Constitution, and legislative action to fulfill them followed soon afterwards. Where are we today? Well, there are lots of good things to report. We are still surviving as one nation, the same nation that was born in 1947. No part has split away. There have been periodic threats to our constitutional values. But despite these setbacks, we have survived as one united nation. We are still struggling to enhance social, political, and economic justice for all Indians. But the effort goes on. We are a functioning democracy, the largest in the world, huge population. We have and this is one of the best kept secrets. Some of my Indian friends here will be surprised. We have growing stabilization of our population. It keeps on increasing, but at a slower rate. We have self-sufficiency in food production. We are the world's 7th largest economy today, and towards the end of the next decade, we may be the 3rd largest economy. We have the highest number of graduating doctors and engineers in the world, a leading world medical, software, and space power, the 3rd largest producer of electricity and also the consumer, the largest irrigated area in the world, the largest milk producer, and the list goes on and on. We have our problems too. We have the largest number of poor in the world. Almost over 40% of our population is still poor. We have the highest number of undernourished people in the world. My guess is that something like 16 to 17% of Indian people are undernourished. We are also, with all that electricity that we consume, we are the 3rd largest producer of greenhouse gases. We have the largest withdrawal of groundwater in the world, and groundwater in India is continuously decreasing. But these problems are beginning to look a little pale compared to the new problems that have emerged. In the last 3 years, since coming to power, the government led by Mr. Narendra Modi seems to be forgetting that India's greatest strength lies in recognizing its diversity, in living with its diversity, in managing that diversity. unfortunately, Mr. Modi's government is pushing the domination of Hindu religious forces. Religious intolerance is also breeding a wider intolerance against a wide variety of minorities, ethnic minorities, cultural minorities, lingual minorities, etc. And in the process, the very idea of India as a nation of tremendous diversity stands threatened. On the economic front, Mr. Modi's government seems to have forgotten the promise of the freedom struggle. It is inviting global capital to come to India. We are neglecting our farmers and farm laborers. They still account for about half of India's workforce. It has cut back on essential public services like health and education, and the hopelessness in the rural areas is reflected in the rising number of farmer suicides in the last few years. What is amazing is that Punjab, which is the richest agricultural state of India, is also reporting thousands of farmer suicides. And the gulf between the rich and the poor is increasing rapidly. We have rising tensions inside India, but also belligerent posturing outside our boundaries against our neighboring China and Pakistan. We seem to have forgotten the messages of non-violence, and military alliances are being forged with other governments, particularly the USA, Japan, Israel. Perhaps some of you are wondering, I think some of you are beginning to wonder, hey, this Mr. Modi begins to look like Mr. Trump. Their visions are not dissimilar. Their visions are not dissimilar, though their approaches are quite different. Neither vision understands the essential strengths of these two great nations. We are liberal. We are based on inclusive social thought because we are highly pluralistic societies, both the US and India. You have problems of Mr. Trump trying to shrink healthcare, public healthcare. We have the same problem. You don't want refugees. Your president doesn't want refugees to keep entering the US. The Indian government wants to keep the Rohingyas back in Myanmar, not in India. And in both the nations, fortunately, pluralistic and inherently liberal societies are trying to restore the balance. So today I want to talk a little bit about one new force that is trying to restore this balance. It's called Swaraj Abhiyan. Abhiyan means campaign. And it's a nationwide organization newly emerged to fulfill India's constitutional vision. I told you what Abhiyan means, I didn't tell you what Swaraj means. I think some of the previous speakers alluded to its meaning. Today, the word Swaraj is associated commonly with Mahatma Gandhi and is loosely translated as self-rule. But as Rajmohan tried to explain to us, it's not just self-rule. It begins with self-discipline, a commitment to self-realization and self-reliance. So it begins with the individual. Politically, it means self-government, where power rests with the people and is wielded by them. And economically, it means self-reliance that can put an end to hunger and deprivation. So Swaraj Abhiyan is a political movement. It was launched in 2015 by thousands of idealistic people across India, led by, I can't call him a young man, but let's call him a younger man, Prashant Bhushan, perhaps India's most admired and highly successful legal crusader, assisted by 3 academics, Dr. Yogendra Yadav, Dr. Anand Kumar, who has also been here, a product of a doctorate of the University of Chicago, and Dr. Ajit Jha, after they were collectively ousted from an earlier experiment called the Aam Aadmi Party. It is the true legacy of the Jan Lokpal movement, the largest anti-corruption movement in India in the recent decades. Now, in the past 2 years, this movement has initiated 4 major campaigns, and recognizing that almost all these problems that we are battling against are essentially political problems and have to be resolved in the political arena, it has also ventured or taken the effort to start a new political party called Swaraj India. Just a little bit about some of the campaigns that they have undertaken. I think the most visible campaign today in India is the farmers' movement, the Jai Kisan Andolan, the victory to the farmers movement. Farmers and farm laborers are the backbone of India's food security. But they have not been part of the rapid economic growth that has taken place in India in the last 2 decades. They have been left out. There's been a tremendous concentration of wealth, but the farmers and farm labor don't get to share that wealth. If you were to look at India's gross domestic product, farm sector accounts for barely 12% of the total value of our GDP. But more than 50%, almost 51 or 52% of the entire workforce works on farms. So half the population gets only 12% of the pot. You hear a lot about our software capabilities. You hear a lot about Digital India. And it's that tertiary sector which accounts for all of the tertiary sector, not just the software industry, but also the hotels, the banking, the finance and all that. They account for only 29% of the workforce who produce almost 60%, 57% of India's GDP. So you begin to understand why farmers are committing suicide. Just a few weeks ago, I saw the figures of the latest round of salary increases announced by the government and by the private sector. The average salary increase this year in the private sector is going to be around 9.5 to 10%. An assistant professor salary increase is going to be about 16%, associate professor 18%. Only the poor assistant professor is going to get maybe about 8 or 10%. How much is the farm laborer going to get? The figures are 0.6 to 2.4%. That's the increment across all the different states. In state after state, I was shocked to see that the increase in the farm labor payment under government schemes will be 1 rupee per day. So, this was the first campaign that the Swaraj Abhiyan took up. In 2015, when almost 40% of India was facing a drought, the Swaraj Abhiyan undertook a march across the country, 4,500 kilometers across 7 states, to bring public attention to the crisis faced by rural India. During this walk, Dr. Yogendra Yadav wrote several letters to different state chief ministers and made suggestions on how to tackle this. But when there was no response coming, finally, the Abhiyan had to knock the doors of the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court had to order the central and state governments to open their coffers to release enough funds for the National Rural Employment Guarantee Program and to enhance its coverage. I shudder to think that if this kind of an effort of a few months had not been there, how many more suicides would we have had that year? The government has been gradually withdrawing from its commitments in the social sector. I remember once, soon after I had returned to India in the 1980s, I was traveling in the state of Orissa, and I had to go by bus from some place to the other. I got on the bus and I suddenly saw that there was a gaping hole. I could have put my foot over there and fallen through. I found a seat, had no back. I was lucky that I had a bench. It was raining heavily, but there was no window. This is 1980. So when I reached my destination, I asked my host, I said, "What kind of buses do you have here?" And he said, the state government is trying to get out of this responsibility of running the transport service and wants to hand it over to private companies. That was my first experience of privatization. But today, the government is withdrawing from its commitment to free primary education, from healthcare. It's amazing that people are being driven to taking loans to put their children through schools. Kathleen, when she was young, paid a fee of, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I asked mom today, how much did we pay? She said probably around 1,400 per quarter. Okay? So how much does that become? About 475 or something per month. We are now paying for the education of 2 young kids who stay with us, and their annual fee is 39,000 rupees, 3,300 rupees per month. Same school. Okay? One of my colleagues suffered a brain hemorrhage. We had to rush him to the hospital. And you will be amazed that the state hospital, the biggest state hospital, immediately tells us, we don't have good facilities here, take him to such and such place. It's a private hospital. Finally, we ended up taking that gentleman to Delhi. We paid about 200,000 rupees for his treatment. There was not a single surgery involved. It was simply the diagnostic tests and the transportation to Delhi and back and the medicines that cost us 200,000 rupees. Where is a poor person going to get that kind of money? My friend was lucky that he had my wife. My wife is a great champion of justice. And she put everything into it. Any of you, if you ever read her blog, she's got a huge following on Facebook. So all she has to do is put the message on Facebook, and she gets the great response. One of her very young colleagues, a kid, not even 20, got knocked down by a car, speeding car. Treatment costs 500,000 rupees, could not save his life. Passed away in a month. Where do poor people come up with this kind of expensive medical care? Swaraj Abhiyan has therefore made this a major component of its work to push for greater commitment to public service, whether it is for health, whether it's for education, whether it is for transport, whether it is for the disabled, etc. We were born out of an anti-corruption movement, and it continues to be a major element of the work of Swaraj Abhiyan. Already it has exposed the scam in the corporate debt restructuring. Many of our large corporations have taken money from banks, misused it, can't pay it back, and so now the government wants to help them. When it comes to helping farmers, without whom people like me cannot survive, or Rajmohan can't survive, though he does a pretty good job, he's quite slim. For farmers' loans, you see the government announcing farmers' loan, and everybody from the Reserve Bank to the newspaper editors, commentators, analysts are jumping up and down. Where will we find the money? But you look at the amount of loans that the corporate sector is not returning to the banks. There are several times that loan waiver for the farmers. We have a lot of unrest because of religious divisions that the government seems to be pushing. The Swaraj Abhiyan is trying very hard to set up peace committees in different parts of the country so that riots, conflict, violence does not break out. But I think that the most courageous step that the Abhiyan has taken, that step was taken last year in October, with the founding of the Swaraj India Party. The basic values of our republic are under attack. Democracy, diversity, and democratic dissent are threatened. And the very idea of India is facing a challenge. Unfortunately, there does not seem to be any other force in the country, political force, with the vision to tackle this challenge. Swaraj India's vision is very much a Gandhian vision. Its primary goal is to fulfill the promises of India's freedom struggle, to create a just society where all Indians have the opportunity to fulfill their potentials and live in peace with one another, with nature, and the rest of the world. I will not bore you any further with details about their program and their current projects, but I will say that to me the biggest hope lies in the fact that the people who have founded the Swaraj India Party are the kind of people who led India's freedom struggle. They are highly successful professionals and activist intellectuals committed to India's constitutional values. They have energized thousands of enthusiastic young people across the country who are also keen on sustaining these constitutional values. And therefore, I am very hopeful. Thank you. You know, in the 50s, there was a lot of hope and excitement in India. We had no doubt that we were going to overcome our problems, our difficulties in a decade or two. That's the way Pandit Nehru talked to us. And if Pandit Nehru said something, we believed it. I was lucky that I was personally inspired by my mother's uncle, who had been a major participant in the freedom movement. And I thought that everyone in the family admires this man. He's such a simple fellow. He doesn't travel by first class. He doesn't hire coolies to pick up his luggage. He has only 3 or 4 pieces of clothing. He washes his own clothes. Very simple person. That's the kind of life I should have. So that was an inspiration. And where did my second inspiration come from? I think it was sometime around January of 1961. Not very sure, but I think it was 61, not 62. A friend of mine came running to my house and said, "Ravi, come on, let's go." Where? Rajmohan Gandhi, grandson of Mahatma Gandhi, he's coming to speak at Chowpatty. It's a big beach in Bombay. We've got seats on the dais. Let's go. So we went. We didn't get seats on the dais, but we were there in the crowd, and I heard Rajmohan. You were not yet 30. You were under 30 at that time. Correct. Tall, handsome as ever. And what a speech he gave. I went home and I told my parents, I don't want to go in for studies. I want to work for the nation. That's the influence you had.